So the Earth Institute is a unique part of this university and fairly unique structurally in the academy. And the way I sometimes explain it is if you think about Columbia University, which for America is an old university starting in 1754, when it first started there were about 4 academic departments: history, philosophy, science, things like that. American higher education evolves through the 19th and 20th century as social needs change. So you see the beginnings of medical school, of law school, all designed to deal with specific problems. Our engineering school used to be called the School of Mines, and it was created because they couldn't figure out how to dig the subway tunnel in Manhattan. And so they actually created a school to deal with those problems. It was called the School of Mines. As people like Mike Crow, who was really the founder of the Earth Institute, started to think about the issue of global sustainability, it was pretty clear to us that the school structure, the departmental and school structure of the university was insufficient. That we needed actually, in dealing with the issue of sustainability, we needed to be able to draw on engineering and law and public health and economics and public policy and environmental science and ecology in very fundamental ways, and we needed something that was above department and above schools to be the integrative force, and that was the Earth Institute. So the Earth Institute is the largest institute at Columbia. It's the only one that reports directly to the provost, and it's really a university-wide enterprise. Unlike any school at Columbia, I'm the chief operating officer. I work for Jeff Sachs, who's our visionary. So he gives the vision. I actually have to make sure the place runs. I'm the management professor. So we get about $11 million a year directly from the president and the center of the university. No school gets that. That would be the equivalent of a $200 million endowment. And so the Columbia University, since the mid-90s, has been spending roughly that much money on this place, in addition to the other things that we do. And I should say that the scientific heart of the Institute is the Lamont-Doherty Earth Observatory. Now, Lamont is a campus 30 miles north of New York City that is 4 times the size of this campus, and we have 500 Earth Institute people there. The Earth Institute is about 750 people and about $140 million a year operation. In contrast, the School of International Public Affairs is less than half that size in its dollars, and staffing is a little hard to compare research to teaching enterprise. In any event, within the Earth Institute, then we have what are called cross-cutting initiatives: energy, water, hazards, food, poverty, urbanization. It's a whole range of them. And we've created research units in every one of those areas. So we have the Lenfest Center for Sustainable Energy, headed by Klaus Lochner. We have the Columbia Water Center, headed by Upmanu Lal. The Columbia Climate Center, headed by Peter Schlosser. We have a whole variety, over 24 of these research units on practically every issue of sustainability. And then we have something called the Earth Institute faculty, which is 24 tenured professors and the head of our major units that meet together and set policy for the whole institute. So this is a very unique enterprise. The last thing I'd say about it is we also, unlike most research institutes at Columbia, do not get heavily involved in education. The Earth Institute has started over 6 new education programs. In the last 2 years, for example, we started an undergraduate major in sustainable development, the Masters of Science in Sustainability Management. Earlier, we started the MPA in Development Practice, the MPA in Environmental Science and Policy, the Masters in Climate and Society, and of course the PhD in Sustainable Development. So this is a very unique part of the university, very creative, and unlike the rest of the university where everything is, the management term is stovepipes. Everybody stays in their own place. The Earth Institute is a gigantic integrative enterprise, very unique for Columbia, very unique for American higher education, and really a very exciting place to be. And so a few years ago, some people started to ask me, well, is sustainable development feasible? And there was a whole project of us trying to work on that. And I decided halfway into the project, even though that project didn't really resolve itself successfully, that we really have no choice but make it feasible. It's either sustainable development is feasible or we're all dead. And so I have this belief that our species is not suicidal. It's just a belief, but I really think it's true. And so I decided to conceptualize sustainability as a management issue, not as an issue of necessarily of policy or of anything else, but to really think about what kind of human activities are necessary if we're going to get to sustainability. So I'm going to try to go through, this is my new book, I'm going to go through this rather quickly so that we have some time for a discussion. So this is the express train version of my book talk. Okay, so what's the goal of sustainability management? I'm trying to figure out how organizations can contribute to global sustainability. To answer the question, can we grow our world economy, open up opportunity to the poorest of poor, and manage to keep the planet intact? I mean, here's the problem. 7 billion people on the planet now, probably growing to 10 billion. China and India and eventually Africa are going to consume as much as the rest of us do today. So how do we keep the planet intact with that level of consumption? Now, there are some people who think you don't have to get to that level of consumption, but I'm a political scientist, and I can tell you that everybody in the world wants what we have. They want the cars, they want the iPods, they want the laptops, they want the air conditioning, they want the wine, and they're going to get it one way or the other. Either they're going to take it from you, or we're going to figure out some way of bringing it about in a peaceful way. So my hope is that we actually figure out a way to do this. So the idea behind the book is to survey the concept of sustainability, and then think about the different arenas of organizations, and then of the issue of energy, water, food, and then move up several units of analysis to cities as integrative systems and planet. And I basically look at each of those issues and say, what are the technological challenges? What don't we know yet? What are the financial, organizational, and management challenges? How do we get the capital? One of the issues that I'm always worried about is how do we get people who are in organizations to know how to do these things? You know, we might develop all sorts of technology and all sorts of methods, but in the end, it's a human being and a bunch of human beings together in organizations that make these things happen. And my focus on management really comes out of my time at EPA when I worked in the underground storage tank program. In America, in 1985, 40% of every underground storage tank for gasoline was leaking. We're now down to about 8%. But you know, it's one thing for a waste to escape into the environment, but this is the stuff they sell, okay? And they know how to keep the gasoline inside the underground tanks. There's lots of technology for that. So why don't they use it? And I mean, some of it, the answer is economics. The gasoline is just too cheap. But some of it is basically management problems. The people working at gas stations don't care. So how do you figure out a way to bring that basic behavior down to the level of implementation, which is always one of the issues that I worry about? So I define sustainable development the same way the Brundtland Commission did. And sustainability management is basically the use of organizational management practices to result in sustainable development. I mean, sustainable development is a wonderful concept, but in the end, it's going to be organizations, and it's going to be people in organizations that make these things happen. So what are the characteristics? Well, one of the characteristics is thinking in the long term instead of focusing on weekly, quarterly, and daily reports. Now, the problem here is that because information's gotten so cheap and communications is getting so cheap, our managers now have real-time information on organizational performance, and they're obsessed with it, okay? You know, you hear about what we call the crackberry, the blackberry. They're always, you know, managers are always looking at those devices. Half the time they're making decisions while they're playing squash or they're jogging because they basically never stop thinking about what they're working in. There's no time to step back and reflect, and sustainability requires stepping back and reflecting, but this information age is affecting management by giving us information on a moment-by-moment basis, and we're all addicted to it. You know, I mean, I kept my iPhone over there, and I'm getting a little nervous here. Something might happen in the Earth Institute that I need to keep track of. There's another concept of management that I talk about in the book, which is that the field of management itself has been evolving through the 20th and now 21st centuries. So it starts, the field itself in some respects starts with mass production and time motion studies and people with stopwatches trying to figure out scientifically, can we get production lines to work better? And then you end up with the human relations school of management, where they figure out that observing workers, no matter what you did, you could turn the air up, you could turn the air down, the lights on, the lights out, it doesn't matter. The thing that had the greatest effect on workers' productivity was the fact they were being observed. And so that creates a whole different sequence and growth of the field of management, away from the more mechanistic to a more organic view of organizations as living and breathing entities. So you see that evolution. Then you see the development of accounting. I mean, believe it or not, generally accepted accounting practices are less than a century old. And so we see that developing. Then in the 1960s, where computing comes in, we see the development of information management and performance measures. First used very badly. Robert McNamara used them effectively at Ford, but then decided to try to translate that to the war in Vietnam and thought that body counts was a good measure of success for the war. So some of the early efforts at management like this didn't work that well. But there have been refinements. I mean, one is here in New York City. We have something called CompStat, which measures crime. In the 90s, we had 2,200 homicides in New York City. Last year, we had less than 500. So that's, in part, one of the reasons for that success. There are a lot of reasons. One of it is that we now measure crime in real time through a system called CompStat. And so so we now send police to where the criminals are instead of protecting rich people's houses on Park Avenue. This is something, a management change that was only possible with the advent of the information age. So you see information growing. Then you see at the beginning of the 21st century, the end of the 20th century, the global corporation. Every corporation suddenly had an international desk. Those corporations no longer have international desks because everything is global, okay? So the next stage of evolution, I believe, is sustainability. Every organization, every CEO is starting to think about, what are my resources? Energy and water, waste, pollution. They're starting to think about that in the same way they think about production and labor and capital, because it's becoming a bigger and bigger input into management decision making. And so the way I look at it is the issue of sustainability is going to enter routine decision making just as international and information and accounting did in previous times. So this is simply another stage in the evolution of the more sophisticated organization. The CEO is going to have to think about physical issues that they never had to think about before. So, is it feasible? I asked that in the book. Can we manage our way to sustainability? Is there enough capacity to produce the food, energy, water, air, and biological necessities that we need? And I'd say right now, we don't know how to do this, but we better figure it out. And I actually believe we will figure it out because the history of human evolution is that we gradually figure these things out. Malthus said we would all be starving by now, but technology intervened and we created a different kind of world. There was a book I was reading, a book review I was reading in the New York Times, which said over the weekend that wealthy people 400 years ago lived worse than poor people live today. That the standard of living of the planet has grown. The issue of survival, of staying warm, and having enough food and having shelter and not being killed by the enemy storming the gates is no longer a day-to-day concern of most people. And that's part of why I think we will figure this out. But we need natural resources, technology, and management and organizational capacity. So what are the prerequisites of sustainability? Well, first of all, we better figure out how to stop blowing ourselves up. A couple of dirty bombs in Times Square or in the center of London or Paris, and all bets are off, because then we're going to have something that I don't even want to think about. And it's not unimaginable that that could happen. New York City has 1,000 police officers working on counterterrorism. They're spending billions of dollars to try to keep the city safe. And I know that that's happening in other cities around the world right now. Population and poverty. We have to have a demographic transition for the whole world. We have to get to the point where people aren't having children because they think it's going to help protect them in old age, or because they're worried about their kids dying due to infant mortality. We know that as people get wealthier, they have fewer children. That's going to happen in the rest of the world also, but we have to do it in time to cap the population at about 10 billion. And then, of course, there's energy. You know, in the end, fossil fuels will probably never run out, because as an economic function, they really can't. They'll get too expensive before they run out. But the point is that fossil fuels are a one-time resource on the planet, and they are going to get more expensive and more difficult to get out of the Earth's crust. And so at some point, there's going to be a tipping point where renewable energy sources are going to have to replace fossil fuels as energy sources. Energy itself is the single most important sustainability issue. You solve the energy issue, you solve the whole issue. But we have to figure out how to reduce our ecological footprint. We have to figure out how to not damage the basic systems that provide us with air and water. We are all biological creatures. We need water. We need to drink water. We need to breathe air. We need to eat food. And to the extent those things are contaminated with poisons from our production process, it's not healthy for us, let's put it that way. So there are technical, managerial, and political challenges for sustainability. For water, we need to figure out a way to distribute and reprocess water. And this is, again, where energy is so useful. If desalinization really becomes feasible, it only becomes feasible as energy prices become lower relative to other parts of our economic wealth. And there's plenty of water on the planet, and the water never leaves the planet. It just gets degraded in different ways, and sometimes is in the wrong place for our needs. And so water, in some respects, is the ultimate management problem. Okay? Waste, we have to learn how to clean sewage and other waste, treating it as a reusable commodity instead of simply a residue. So waste to energy, anaerobic digestion, better recycling, products that go back into reuse. I mean, Xerox makes a copier where 80% of the copier at the end of the lease goes back to the company, and they can reuse it in the next generation of copiers. That kind of closed system engineering has to become more typical. Food, you know, I get a lot of my students think that all the food should be grown by local farmers, and we should all eat organic food. And I wish that we could. I know the person that runs New York's green markets. We have these stands all over the city. And I said, why don't you expand this? Why don't you get some more of these? And he said, we're out of farmers. Every farmer within 150 miles of New York City is selling everything they grow in those green markets. Okay? And it only provides 5% of the food for the city. Without industrial farming, this city couldn't exist, and the planet would starve. And so we have to figure out a way to make industrial farming more energy efficient, more water efficient, and less polluting. In America, we still have this mythology of the family farm. So the farms have largely escaped regulation under the basic environmental regulations, because everybody has in mind that it's some family on a farm, not some huge industrial feedlot where they've got thousands upon thousands of pigs and cows and chickens. So the image of how people get their food and the real situation are radically different. The other thing that we need to do is we need to learn how to measure the planet's conditions. Now, of course, here I am a lobbyist. I run the Earth Institute. But the degree to which our basic observations of air and water and ground and the fundamental conditions of the planet, we don't understand. We don't really understand long-term climate. We don't really understand where the next earthquakes are coming from. We have at Lamont a group of several dozen seismologists, and they're very good at studying and understanding earthquakes, but they really still can't predict where and when they're going to happen. Someday we should be able to do that. The same thing is true of climate. We can predict the long-term, 10 years from now, the basic trends of climate, and we certainly have studied the past very effectively. But tell me whether it's going to rain a week from now. I can't, and neither can the scientists here. All of these kinds of technologies that need to be brought in and developed require government intervention. America, you probably heard from Bob Shapiro earlier today, is becoming a very polarized country, and the idea of government investment in infrastructure or basic research and development, which is a function only government can perform, is something that is under challenge right now. Now, the United States has this wonderful system of research universities, which is an incredible resource for developing basic science, but we're unable to get it done now. Now, there are lots of examples in American history of the basic science coming out of a partnership largely between universities and the military. So, I mean, the internet started as a Defense Department project to share data across their computers. I mean, laptop computers are probably one of my favorite examples. Why did they shrink the computer? When I was in graduate school, the computer I used was the size of this room, okay? And it had less computing power than my iPhone has. Why did they shrink it? They shrank it for only one reason: to put it on missiles, to help the guidance systems, and eventually to put that into manned spacecraft. They needed to make those as light as possible. And that created the dynamism behind shrinking the computer. And then a guy like Steve Jobs would look at that and say, hey, this could really be something neat to have at home. And it becomes a commercial product. But the basic science came out of the military. And so these kinds of exchanges between government and the private sector are essential and are under threat here. Fortunately, there's other parts of the world that are picking up some of the initiative. And now that we have a global economy, I mean, again, it's hard to tell Americans this, but you know, there are certainly French corporations and Chinese corporations in America, but they're all global corporations. They all do business everywhere. And increasingly, it's hard to know where the company is from based on where their capital is and where their people are and where their products are being sold. And so the fact that the next solar power initiative is probably going to come out of China is not a great threat to American security. You know, we're going to be able to buy it because they're going to want to sell it to us. So, you know, capitalism may save us after all. Okay, let's see. Getting technologies into the workplace, into people's daily lives is a challenge. One of the great successes in the last 20 years is the cell phone. There are 5 billion cell phones on this planet right now. Again, here's a product 20 years ago we didn't know we needed. Okay, and now people can't live without them. Go to a teenager and tell them they can't text message for a few hours and see whether this is a luxury or a necessity. But organizations are slow to change. Let's see. Let me try to skip through here. There's a lot we don't know about sustainability issues. And so the idea that there's going to be some huge rational experiment to figure out sustainable technologies is not the way it's going to work. We're going to try some things, we're going to fail. We're going to succeed in some other things. Over time, we're going to change the technological base of our society. Okay, so those are the fundamental things. I go through in the book manufacturing, which basically talks about the integrating into organizations what we call industrial ecology, trying to get organizations to think about sustainability issues as fundamental management issues. And this is happening, engineers are doing this already in a lot of products on energy. And so take, for example, air conditioners or refrigerators. They use about a quarter to a third of the energy they used 10 years ago. Now, how did that happen? It happened because the engineers working on the new product development were told, start paying attention to how much energy you're using. You know, one of the biggest energy users in the American household now is the box that includes your cable channels and your DVR. In fact, I'm told that that in some households, it uses more electricity than the refrigerator and all the lights combined. Okay, it's a big energy user and it's on 24 hours a day. Somebody right now is thinking about how do I create a cable box that's more energy efficient. And so we're going to be doing more and more of those things, and that's happening throughout businesses. And businesses are starting to look at energy and water as cost of doing business in a way they didn't look at before. But some of these technologies haven't been developed, and more of them need to be. The biggest problem in business is business culture is organized around short-term revenues and profits. The stock market, the way we judge managers, the way we judge workers. You know, we're still managing our organizations around the year. And why the year? The year is an agricultural phenomenon. It has nothing to do with industry. Okay, but we still measure how our organizations perform around that metric, when in some cases the appropriate metric might be 3 years or might be 6 months. But you know, this is how we do things, and we need to figure out ways of bringing sustainability practices into the routine decision making of large corporations and government organizations. Okay, energy. The U.S. system, as all systems, are characterized by large-scale, capital-intensive centralized facilities. Some are nuclear and hydro, but most are fossil fuels, particularly coal in this country. Energy, fossil fuels are still cheaper than other forms of energy. That is going to start to change. It already is starting to change. The pace of change is something nobody really knows where and when these tipping points will take place, but they will take place. Part of the issue is attracting capital, and here's where government plays a role. Capital always goes after the highest rate of return. It doesn't care. It's like water flowing downhill. Okay? It doesn't care really what the product is or anything. It cares about what the rate of return is. And so in order for rates of return to be affected, to drive capital into renewable energy, government has to intervene. Now in this country, that happened with private homes. Before World War II, 75% of the people in the United States were renters. Today, 70% of the people in the United States are homeowners. This change took place because of two things. The deductibility of mortgage interest, which started after World War II, and the guaranteed loan for mortgages, which the government decided to guarantee and to insure mortgages. And so suddenly, you could buy a house with 10% down or 20% down, and you got a tax deduction for your mortgage payment, which you didn't get on your rent, and suddenly we became a nation of owners. Now, why is that useful? It creates a middle class and a stake in property. The story I often tell, there's this development out in Long Island called Levittown. When Levittown was built in the 1950s, there were 3 models of homes. There were just 3 different homes. Now, if you go to Levittown today, because people have built all sorts of additions in and around their homes, you would never be able to tell that there were 3 basic models. It looks like there were 100 different models because people put their sweat equity and their excess capital into these homes over time. All of this was a result of public policy pushing capital in a particular direction. That has to happen in energy as well, or it will be a very long time before renewable energy replaces fossil fuels. Now, for some people, that might not be a bad thing. Water. And here, most water goes into farming. Farming is incredibly inefficient in how it uses water. And so that's the low-hanging fruit. We can figure out ways of creating agricultural systems that use less water. The other thing is we need to be able to invest in infrastructure to carry water from places where we have too much of it to places we have too little. Again, in the United States, the city of Los Angeles, the city of Phoenix, the city of Tucson, and the city of Las Vegas would not exist were it not for a massive public works project to take water from the Rocky Mountains and bring it all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. Okay, that happened because of the federal government and a massive public works project without which those cities simply could not exist. They would have exhausted their water supply many, many years ago. So again, we have the technology, the capital may not be there, and some of the wisdom, some of the conduits for the water destroyed local environments and probably could have been done more effectively. I think I'm going to skip. Food, I already made the point. We have to have industrial agriculture. Let me see if I can get, okay, cities. Cities. So about 4 years ago, more than half the planet for the first time lived in cities. There is this idea in the environmental movement that somehow we should live close to nature and spread out among the planet. If we did that, we would destroy the planet. In fact, the answer to sustainability is greater concentrations of populations so you can build infrastructure to contain their waste and to make them more energy and water efficient. And so, in fact, I don't think I want to restart now. Maybe I'll restart later. Okay. So we need concentrations, and cities are, in fact, places where sustainability will have to take place. Mass transit, green roofs, tree planting, parkland, all of those kinds of things, the electric car, all of that will ultimately make cities even more inhabitable than they are today. Now again, this is a particularly US issue because in the United States, we basically spread out among the countryside. Everybody in America wants to have their own acre of land and their own home. That isn't the aspiration of people in other parts of the world, fortunately. And it's decreasing as an appeal here in the United States as people are starting to see some of the benefits of living in cities. Obviously, we're going to need to make the energy system more efficient with smart grid, electric cars, and we need the capital to do that. The problem in America is Americans are undertaxed, but they think they're overtaxed. And so how we're going to solve that problem is not something I'm going to get into today, but there is a problem with that. And then for the whole planet, part of it is we need to be able to make sure the technology developed doesn't become a national comparative advantage. I don't believe it's going to happen because of the global corporation. I mean, it's interesting. Nation states still have a hard time, signing treaties and agreeing with each other, but corporations do much better. They buy each other out. They have local subsidiaries. We work with Pepsi on water issues. And Pepsi, when they go into a new country, they buy a local bottling plant. They buy a water company. You go to the forest reaches of rural Africa, and there'll be a little refrigerator at the country store that Pepsi puts in there, and those Pepsi trucks somehow make their way up these hills that nothing else seems to be able to get to. Okay, so I believe that in fact American and global corporations are going to play a very important role in bringing sustainability technology throughout the whole economy. Let me see how I want to finish this. Okay, can we manage this complexity, or will a modern economy destroy the planet? Now that's really the question. The world is getting more complicated. The technology and the conditions are more complicated. The demands on management are becoming greater. And that's basically what my book talks about, is how do we create sustainability managers? The key technological challenge, I think, is energy. The key financial challenge is funding the capital cost of the transition to green infrastructure. Short-term tangible impacts have more effect and more political strength. I mean, this is the problem with an issue like climate. Climate is a problem that's created everywhere, and its impacts are in the future. So politically, it's probably the worst case scenario if you want to actually make something happen. Now, you take something like toxic waste. Toxic waste happens locally. It affects people locally. It's not hard to get people motivated to do something about it. Okay, those kinds of environmental issues are very easy to get people to act on. Climate isn't one of those things. Energy, the issue of energy is going to get addressed, I think, and the climate issue will get addressed ultimately as the price of energy goes up relative to GDP. And the price of energy is going up relative to GDP right now and has been for the last decade for two reasons. One is the long-term price of energy. The other is that GDP isn't growing as fast as it used to. And so the ratio is changing. What are the odds of success? Current data says we're headed toward a catastrophe. If you look at the trend lines, the picture's not good. But I think that we'll figure it out. I think that the young people that I teach here and that I see every day have internalized the importance of these sustainability issues. They're not radical environmentalists. They don't want to sit, with nature all the time. They don't want to reduce their consumption, but they understand the challenges of continuing the lifestyles we have. And so I think I've probably given you enough things to ask questions about, so I'd be happy to get into a discussion about any of this. Questions, issues?
As you meet with students, I'd like to know more about the business school here, Columbia, New Jersey, in the United States, and students who go to MDP, MPA,
Yeah.
PhD, we know that they know that.
Yeah, the business school here couldn't care less. The students can.
So, yeah.
Some of the students are attracted to these issues, but our business school, well, first of all, the business school at Columbia is totally focused on Wall Street. I mean, it's basically, that's where its graduates go, and its faculty mainly care about that. So we'll know that the world has really changed when Wall Street starts paying attention to sustainability issues, and those students suddenly start to say, oh, I better take a course on ecology, but that hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, but you're talking about management, and so these are the people who will be management.
Well, they're not, see, I think they're going to be very poorly prepared for this. So we actually have other programs that are training managers, and it's actually one of the interesting things. The other thing this business school doesn't do, and most American business schools doesn't train people in the regulatory dimension of business or politics. That's why SIPA has been so successful, because while they don't do it, we do it. We don't do management and finance as well as they do, but we do enough of it. And then we also teach people about politics. It's a very partial view. I mean, actually, the funny thing about the business school here is they didn't do international business until Mayor Feldberg became the dean. So have you heard from Al Steppen yet? Okay, so Al's going to come. Al was the dean when I became the curriculum dean at SIPA in the 80s. And all the international business at Columbia was in SIPA. And we went over and talked with them about trying to do some things together. And Feldberg actually had as a priority changing it. But until then, they only cared about American business. Obviously that's changed, and I think it'll change on this too, but they usually change more slowly than the rest of the world does. Let's put it that way.
What kind of lever, what kind of methods or strategy you can use to influence stakeholders to change their understanding of that complexity, value chain, and all that sort of things? How do you do it?
Well, I think some of the larger corporations are actually becoming change agents. Walmart is probably, in America, one of the best examples. So Walmart is a giant in terms of its relationship to its suppliers. They have 100,000 suppliers. And if you want to sell to Walmart now, you have to comply with their sustainability indices. You have to report to them on how much energy and water and waste are utilized in what you produce. They don't do that because suddenly in Arkansas they've discovered nature. The thing they discovered, the green that they like in Arkansas is the currency and the dollar. And so what happens there, this saves money. I mean, if you think, and I think that's how it's going to get into organizations more than anything else. So Walmart is a good example also in that. What is Walmart in the business of selling? It basically leases its shelf space to suppliers, okay? And so if the supply can be concentrated and high value added, they make more money per square foot. So they won't buy any detergent, for example, that isn't highly concentrated. Because why should they sell water? Okay, they have the water in the washing machine already. And they can make more money by having 20 of these half gallons as opposed to 10 gallons. And that's how they do it. So that's going to be one of the change agents. The other thing is, I think, a perceptual change. I think that most people understand that the world is getting more crowded and that resources are becoming depleted. And what I mean by that is, I mean, in this country, everybody knows the place that they used to hike when they were a kid that's now a strip mall or is now a housing development. It isn't hard, and I think it's in people's consciousness that the planet is getting more crowded. I mean, I'm 58 years old. When I was growing up, there were 3 billion people on the planet, okay? And I remember when I wrote my dissertation, which was on citizen participation in environmental policy in the mid-70s, I think there were 4 billion people on the planet then. And in another couple of weeks, we're going to be up to 7 billion. Well, those people have to go somewhere. I mean, the idea that they have no impact on resources or on the planet's ecosystem is just ludicrous. The planet's not that big. I mean, it's big, but it's not that big. So I think people understand that. And I think it's a combination of economics, of price, of consciousness, and of ideology. Young people, I think, have absorbed this. And the messages are getting around the world much, much faster than they used to. So if you think about the impact of mass media as being part of, why did what hastened the demise of communism and of Eastern Europe? Part of it was the images of wealth in Western Europe and in the West. It became harder to keep out and to keep people from seeing it. And one of my favorite stories of the Khrushchev era was he went home he took movies of him in Harlem to show how badly Americans lived when they were in poverty. And all people could talk about was the nylons on the clotheslines and the cars that were all over Harlem, which they didn't have back in Moscow at that time. So now the internet provides images that are free and accessible to people in ways they've never been accessible before. And the impact of that socially and politically is amazing. I mean, you see it socially. You get off the plane in Bogota and teenagers are wearing the same exact T-shirts that you just saw them wearing in New York. And I'm sure you see the same thing in London and Paris. In other words, there's one world culture, especially among these kids. And I think that that's how the consciousness is going to change. And you see it happening rapidly. And we haven't really seen its political impact. In America, we saw it with the Obama campaign. Barack Obama raised $350 million from the internet in contributions of $50 or less. Never been done before. Totally overwhelmed the corporate money at that point, and totally surprised everybody. So we're seeing so that technology is having a political impact that we can't really predict right now. Yeah.
The early results of green energy in terms of subsidies that are required are not very good, right? There's some growing controversy. How do you think this will play out? I read recently that there's a big firm in the US called Solindra, which bankrupt.
Right.
In many countries like France, there is less and less acceptance about the tax that is funding this. What is your view on that?
Well, here's the fundamental, I guess, the way I would put it. And actually, you know what Moore's law is on computers? That every 18 months, that basically you're on a cost curve so that the power of the computer gets greater and the price goes down. Well, technology can have that impact if the cost of raw materials is not central to the cost calculus. And so solar power will eventually, I don't know when eventually will take place, but will eventually be cheaper than coal and other fossil fuels in generating electricity, just because the price of the basic fuel is free, okay, meaning the sun. So it's just a question of the technological development of the solar cell and the battery and the distribution system. So if you have better distribution through a smart grid, you have a more efficient solar cell, and you have a more efficient battery system to store the energy. If you have all those things, and again, I'm not a scientist, I'm a political scientist, but I'm told by the people here who do that work, like Vijay Modi, that in fact the cost curve solar power is getting less expensive from coming out of solar cells. That it's a question of technological development. So that technology will develop. Now, in the case of fossil fuel extraction, there's also been technological development, okay? And so you are able to get to fuels you couldn't get to before, okay? One of the problems with some of it is that some of it's creating more ecological impact than before. So we had the Gulf oil spill. We also have things like hydrofracking here or mountaintop removal. Good technologies, but not exactly good for the planet. So the true cost of that energy production is not reflected in the cost of the energy, okay? So, and solar has some problems with the cells themselves are toxic. And so you're going to have to create over time not just a more efficient solar cell, but a less toxic solar cell. But again, human ingenuity can go to work on that problem. We can't go to work on the problem of fossil fuels because eventually we use them. I mean, I actually think 100 years from now, people are going to say, you burn that stuff? You could have used it for plastics, for this and that, and this and that in production. Instead, you burned it? What was the matter with you people? This is a valuable one-time resource of the creation of the planet. And even though if there's a lot of it, is that really the best use of it, particularly given issues like climate change? But even forget about climate change, just in terms of cost. If we can come up with a lower cost way of generating electricity, why wouldn't we do it? I think we will. I mean, I wrote about that today in the Huffington Post. I actually talked about about Steve Jobs, and that somewhere there's a couple of people working in a garage or a shack somewhere coming up with the answer to these technological questions, I hope. I also talk about, it's hard, sometimes you don't want to use current thinking to project the future. So the biggest environmental problem we had in New York City in 1905 was horse manure. The city streets were loaded with it. It was just awful. We don't talk about that anymore because the internal combustion engine, a technology nobody expected, got rid of all the horses. Okay? So we don't really know what the technological future is going to look like. But a solution that focuses on using raw materials that are natural resources versus one that allows prices to go down because of technology and human ingenuity, I think in the long run it can only go in one direction. It might not be solar. It could be a form of nuclear that, I mean, if you could create a nuclear power that doesn't create a waste and doesn't create a bomb, that might be the answer. I mean, we know that scientifically there's infinite amounts of energy at the subatomic level. So, or virtually infinite. The point is there are other technological solutions. And I think that in the long run, and again, how long and how much damage? So are we talking about 100 years? Are we talking about 20 years? Are we talking about 50 years? I think it's going to happen. But my colleague Klaus Lochner, looking at this, who says we have to do everything, and I don't know if you guys get to meet Klaus. Okay, so Klaus says we use more stones today than we did during the Stone Age. We use more wood for fuel today than when wood was the main form of fuel. And we'll use all the coal and all the fossil fuels we can find for as long as we can find them. And that's why he wants to do carbon capture and storage. And he's working on that pretty hard. I don't disagree with that. But I actually think that if you could find a cheap form of generating electricity from the sun, and it worked, and it could be distributed widely, and you had a way to store it and distribute it, that solves the problem. And it solves the problem without a lot of other complicated technologies. And when it gets to be cheaper than coal and cheaper than oil, you probably won't use as much of that stuff. Maybe you won't use it at all. But Klaus is right about the fact that the technology over time continues to, you always use the old stuff even as you develop the new stuff.
So I would like to thank Stephen for his intervention, and I would like to invite him to join us for lunch and invite you to ask him questions during lunch.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.